He slapped me in front of everyone on his birthday, and in that moment, I felt something break inside me. The laughter and chatter around us froze for a split second as all eyes turned toward us. Ethan's hand was still in the air, his face red with anger, while I stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I had trusted him completely, loved him for 3 years, and believed we were building a life together. And now, in front of all our friends and family, he humiliated me as if I were nothing more than a passing inconvenience in his perfect little world. The party had started with smiles and music, champagne glasses clinking, and the warm chatter of people who thought this was just another birthday celebration. I had walked in wearing my favorite dress, excited to celebrate the man I thought cared for me. But the excitement turned to disbelief in an instant. One moment, Ethan was joking with his friends, and the next, he was accusing me of some imagined betrayal, and ended with that slap that echoed louder than any words could. I could feel the stares of everyone around us, some shocked, some whispering. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and vanish, but I couldn't. Not because I was weak, but because I had spent years quietly building something I knew would give me power, something no one, not even him, could touch. I didn't react in anger right away. That would have been exactly what he wanted, to see me broken, defeated, humiliated. Instead, I forced myself to breathe and stand tall, keeping my composure even as my chest tightened with shock and hurt. In that moment, I realized just how blind I had been. Ethan thought he knew everything about me, that he could control and belittle me without consequences. He had no idea about the life I had quietly built behind the scenes, the business ventures I had invested in, the companies I had helped flourish. He had no clue that I was stronger, smarter, and more capable than he would ever understand. I looked around at the party, at the familiar faces frozen in awkward silence, and I felt a strange clarity. Humiliation burned, yes, but it also sparked something else, determination. I knew then that this moment, as crushing as it seemed, was not the end of me. It was the beginning of a reckoning he would never see coming. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. Because what happened that night wasn't just a slap, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that the people who hurt us sometimes do so without knowing that we are far stronger than they could ever imagine. That night, I wasn't losing myself. I was just beginning to take control. I had trusted Ethan completely, believed in him in ways I never believed in anyone else. When he started Collins Tech Solutions, I had been there from the very beginning, quietly supporting him, investing not just money but time, ideas, and advice. I had stayed up late helping him work through financial reports, offered solutions when deals fell through, and even covered some of the company's expenses when things got tight. I thought we were partners in every sense of the word. But over time, his true colors began to show. Ethan had always been confident, but that confidence slowly turned into arrogance. He started dismissing my opinions, laughing off my advice in front of clients, and taking credit for ideas I had suggested. Every small success he had, he treated as if he had achieved it alone. And the more successful he became, the more entitled he felt. He acted as if I owed him my support, as if my belief in him was a given rather than a choice. Then there was Clara, his younger sister. She had always seemed sweet at family gathering, but I began to notice subtle digs, comments meant to unsettle me. She would question my intentions, hint that I was only around for money or influence, and laugh at the slightest misstep I made. Clara wasn't overtly cruel, but she had this way of planting seeds of doubt, making others in the room glance at me suspiciously. It was as if she enjoyed seeing me struggle to defend myself, while Ethan just watched. The humiliation escalated when Ethan started openly insulting me in front of others, pretending it was a joke. At business meetings, he would mock my knowledge, shrug off my contributions, and make comments about my lack of experience in ways that were impossible to ignore. I could see the looks exchanged between clients and colleagues, the subtle shift in respect. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I forced myself to listen, to observe, and to stay calm. Anger grew quietly inside me, along with disbelief. How could someone I had loved, someone I had sacrificed so much for, treat me like this? I replayed the moments in my mind, the countless nights I had supported him while he barely acknowledged my efforts. Each insult, each mocking remark, built a quiet fire within me. I realized that I wasn't just hurt, I was being tested, forced to see the truth of who Ethan really was. Even as I felt the sting of betrayal, I began to understand the bigger picture. My patience and discretion had allowed me to build a foundation he could never touch. I wasn't powerless, even if he thought I was. And as anger simmered beneath the surface, I knew this story wasn't over. Ethan had underestimated me, and Clara's subtle attacks only reminded me that I had to be smart and strategic. The humiliation, the disbelief, the betrayal, they were all shaping the path to a reckoning that was long overdue. What Ethan didn't know, what no one at those meetings or parties realized, was that I controlled Colin's tech solutions. I had quietly bought a controlling share months ago, piece by piece, while he bragged about building his empire alone. Every careless decision he made, every reckless investment, only made it easier for me to take control without drawing attention. I wasn't just a supportive girlfriend, I was the one holding the reins behind the scenes. I remember the night I first decided to invest. Ethan had just closed a deal that looked impressive on paper, but I saw the cracks in the numbers, the mismanagement he didn't notice. I calculated the risk, poured my resources into buying shares quietly, and let him celebrate his success, while I strengthened my position. It wasn't about vengeance then. It was about strategy, about ensuring that when the time came, I would have the power to protect myself, and to correct the mistakes that Ethan seemed blind to. I would sit in our apartment late at night, reviewing financial statements he had dismissed, monitoring the growth of the company, and quietly expanding my influence. I told myself to be patient. Wait for the right moment, I would think. Do not act while emotions are high. Wait until the moment guarantees maximum impact. The anticipation became almost a game, a silent challenge that only I understood. Every arrogant remark he made in front of clients, every dismissive comment he directed at me, reminded me why patience was crucial. I could see the tipping point approaching, the moment when humiliation and betrayal could be turned into empowerment. I had all the pieces, all the power. He had no idea that the woman he thought was dependent on him actually held the key to his company's future. Even when Clara tried to subtly undermine me, her comments only fueled my focus. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't vengeful without reason. I was calculated, keeping my composure while slowly tightening my control. I reviewed board meeting notes, shareholder reports, and contracts, preparing for the day when everything would shift. That day wasn't today, but it was coming. And when it did, Ethan would finally see what I had built. Not for him, not with him, but despite him. In those quiet moments, as I mapped my strategy, I felt a calm strength settle over me. There was no rush, no panic, only certainty. Each step I took, every small investment, brought me closer to the moment when I could turn the humiliation he had caused me into his greatest shock. I didn't need to confront him yet. I only needed to wait. The anticipation wasn't painful, it was empowering. And I knew deep down that when the right moment came, everything would change. He would finally realize that the woman he thought he had under his control was, in fact, the one quietly controlling everything he had worked so hard to build. Daniel Rivers was the one person I trusted to help me move without making mistakes. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a friend who knew how corporate fights worked and when to stay quiet. We met in a small cafe late one night, away from prying eyes, and I told him everything I could without letting emotion take over. Daniel listened, asked sharp questions, and then laid out steps that made sense. Gather proof, tighten the timeline, protect the people who would help, and never act until the case was airtight. Our first job was facts. I hired a forensic accountant through Daniel, someone who could read between the lines of the company numbers and spot cooked books or missing invoices. We traced payments, looked for shell vendors, and checked who approved what. Small things added up. Unexplained transfers, duplicate invoices, expenses that didn't match project. Each irregularity became a thread we pulled until a pattern showed itself. At the same time, Daniel advised me to collect direct evidence. Emails, signed contracts, meeting minutes, anything that tied reckless decisions to real harm. We subpoenaed files where needed and asked a few trusted employees to save old messages. I knew that rumors and feelings wouldn't win a boardroom. The proof had to be paper, timestamps, and signatures. We made sure every document was copied, dated, and stored in 2 separate secure locations. People mattered as much as papers. Ethan's missteps had hurt staff morale and cost the company clients. Quietly, I reached out to a few loyal employees who had seen the bad decisions firsthand. They were scared, so I made them feel safe. Daniel explained whistleblower protections and how their testimonies could be formalized without exposing them to retaliation. Their accounts gave context to the numbers, showing how choices were made, who benefited, and who paid the price. We also mapped the corporate structure and shareholder rules. Daniel taught me how votes worked, how proxy filings could shift control, and what kind of emergency motions would be accepted by the board. Timing mattered. A surprise move without support would fail, but a coordinated notice backed by evidence could force a meeting and legal review. We planned how to present the facts so the board would see the risk and act immediately. I kept emotions locked down. When friends asked if I wanted to confront Ethan now, I said no. Daniel reminded me that a single outburst could ruin everything. Instead, I cataloged everything in a neat, unflashy binder. Numbered exhibits, short summaries, and a clear timeline of decisions and their consequences. I rehearsed how I would speak, what questions the board might ask, and how to deflect attempts to smear my reputation. There were small victories along the way. An internal audit we pushed for, a client resuming talks after evidence of mismanagement surfaced, an executive agreeing to testify. Each win brightened the path, but also raised the stakes. I knew Ethan would fight once he sensed danger. That's why Daniel emphasized contingency plans, secure emergency funds, legal restraining orders if needed, and a communication strategy for employees and clients to prevent panic. Planning felt like folding a complicated map into something simple and precise. The work was quiet and slow, full of spreadsheets and late calls, but every careful step built pressure in the right place. I wanted justice, not spectacle. With Daniel's steady hand and the facts arranged like bricks, I could feel the moment of confrontation drawing near, controlled, inevitable, and designed to leave no room for doubt. Slowly, without anyone noticing, I began steering the company the way it should have been run all along. I didn't announce myself or make bold statements. Instead, I started by quietly influencing decisions that mattered most: budget approvals, client meetings, and project timelines. Employees began consulting me more, asking for clarification on reports, and even seeking my advice in ways they had never dared with Ethan. It was subtle, almost invisible, but every nod of acknowledgement built my quiet authority. Ethan, of course, still thought he was in control. He continued making bold, careless moves, unaware that I was gradually trimming his influence. I started delegating critical decisions to people I trusted, routing approvals through channels I could monitor. Each time he tried to intervene, I had already anticipated his reaction and prepared countermeasures that left him frustrated, but without a single hint of confrontation. The company was beginning to run smoother under my guidance, and yet he didn't realize it. I also began playing psychological games, though carefully. I appeared calm and forgiving, letting him think I was unconcerned with his behavior. At meetings, I smiled when he made mistakes, never showing irritation, letting him overextend his confidence. I asked thoughtful questions that made him feel consulted while subtly guiding choices in my favor. Every interaction was a balancing act. I needed him to feel powerful while I quietly gained control. Employees started noticing differences in the company's direction. Morale was improving and productivity was rising. They didn't know I was behind it all, but their recognition gave me an internal satisfaction. Small victories stacked together like invisible dominoes, each one strengthening my position. I reveled in the quiet triumph of seeing projects succeed, clients satisfied, and Ethan increasingly isolated without knowing why. Clara, Ethan's sister, also began to notice the shift. She tried to undermine me subtly, questioning decisions or spreading gossip. But I remained steady. I smiled, offered logical explanations, and continued executing strategies that strengthened my control. Her efforts were ineffective, and each failed attempt only confirmed that my patience and strategy were paying off. The suspense grew with every passing week. Ethan's arrogance made him predictable. I could anticipate his next move, counter it without confrontation, and maintain the appearance of calm. The employees who once hesitated to speak now approached me with updates and concerns, solidifying my invisible leadership. I was no longer just a shareholder. I was the quiet force running the company. Every small victory, every acknowledgement from staff, every successful project added to a growing sense of empowerment. I felt my confidence surge, my focus sharpen. The company was under my control, even if Ethan didn't realize it, and the anticipation of the eventual confrontation became more thrilling by the day. I was patient, calculated, and in command, knowing that the final moment of reckoning would arrive exactly when it needed to, and Ethan would never see it coming. The evening of the corporate gala arrived, and I walked in like nothing had changed. The chandeliers glimmered above, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the room. Ethan was already there, surrounded by colleagues, puffing up with pride as he shared stories of his hard work and supposed achievements. I let him enjoy the illusion. If he thought I was still the same supportive girlfriend, oblivious and powerless, it would make the moment of revelation all the more impactful. I smiled, exchanged polite greetings, and let my presence be noticed without drawing attention. Daniel was nearby, watching quietly, ready to step in if needed. I could feel the tension building already, subtle but undeniable. Ethan strutted around the room, holding court, confident that everyone was listening and admiring him. He laughed at jokes, interrupted conversations, and made a show of his supposed dominance. Each movement he made, every arrogant remark, only fueled the quiet satisfaction building inside me. During a casual networking session, I began planting small hints about my involvement in the company. I commented on projects with insights that only someone deeply familiar with internal decisions could know. I spoke casually about board meetings, shareholder votes, and company strategies, letting the right words fall at the right moment. Most people listened politely, assuming I was just knowledgeable. Only Daniel caught the significance in my tone, the way I framed certain decisions with subtle authority. He gave me a slight nod, the kind that said, "Everything is going as planned." Ethan noticed some of the attention I was getting but misinterpreted it entirely. He smiled and tried to appear charming, unaware that the quiet confidence I carried was not just poise, it was power. He approached me during the evening, leaning in and joking about decisions he thought he controlled, and I responded with calm, measured words that left him slightly off balance. The spark of uncertainty in his eyes gave me a rush, confirming that the psychological groundwork I had laid was working. Every glance around the room heightened the suspense. I watched colleagues react to my subtle remarks, some nodding in agreement, others quietly reassessing their impressions of Ethan's role. I remained composed, never overplaying my hand, letting the tension build naturally. The audience felt it too. The shift in power was almost invisible, but it was there. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had changed, even if Ethan didn't notice. He still believed he was in control, still flaunting his confidence, still unaware that the woman standing beside him was the one quietly steering the company. The anticipation, the silent power struggle, and the sense that something was about to break all hung in the air. I walked away from each interaction with steady calm, knowing that the confrontation to come would be precise, unstoppable, and completely unexpected. The boardroom was packed, the air thick with chatter and polite greetings. I stepped to the front, calm and composed, as Ethan sat confidently at the head of the table, smiling as if he owned the room. He had no idea what was about to happen, and that ignorance made the moment perfect. I let the murmurs settle, waited a beat, and then spoke. My voice was steady, clear, and deliberate. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began, letting my eyes sweep across the room. "I know many of you have worked with Ethan for years and believe he is the one in charge of Collins Tech Solutions. I want to clarify something important today." Heads turned, some curious, some confused. Ethan's smile faltered, but he didn't interrupt. I continued, each word carefully chosen to carry authority. "I am the majority shareholder of Collins Tech Solutions," I said plainly. The words landed like a punch. Gasps filled the room. Board members shifted in their seats. Employees exchanged stunned glances. Ethan's face went pale, his confident posture collapsing as realization hit. For years, he had flaunted his dominance, believing he controlled the company, and now the truth was undeniable. I didn't rush. I let the weight of the revelation sink in, watching the subtle panic begin to show in his eyes. I went on, calmly explaining the details of my ownership, the shares I had quietly accumulated, and the steps I had taken to ensure the company's stability. I described the mismanagement I had observed and the corrective measures I had already implemented behind the scenes. The room was silent except for my voice. Every word reinforced my authority and his impotence. Ethan tried to speak, to protest, to reclaim some semblance of control, but I raised my hand gently, signaling him to wait. "This isn't about humiliation," I said, my tone steady. "It's about responsibility. The company's future matters more than pride, and it has always been my priority to protect it." He opened his mouth again, but no one looked at him. The board, the employees, and the clients were all listening to me. Finally, I concluded with a statement that left no room for doubt. "Ethan, you had the chance to lead wisely, and you chose arrogance over judgment. I hope this serves as a reminder that leadership is earned, not assumed, and that true power often operates quietly. From this point forward, I will ensure Collins Tech Solutions thrives, for the people who believe in it and for the work it deserves." The room remained silent for a moment, stunned by the revelation. Then the murmurs started, this time of acknowledgement and respect, not shock. Ethan sat frozen, humiliated and powerless, unable to respond as the reality sank in. I had not only exposed the truth, but also secured my position completely. For the first time, I felt the full weight of satisfaction. Years of planning, patience, and strategic action had led to this moment. The betrayal and humiliation I had endured were now reversed. The company, the board, the employees, and even Ethan himself had witnessed the undeniable truth. I was the one in control. And I had done it with calm, precision, and total authority. The morning after the reveal, the company felt different, calmer, steadier, and more focused. Ethan didn't show up for the first board meeting, and when he finally arrived, it was clear he had no support left. The board moved quickly, citing mismanagement and poor judgment, and formally removed him from all decision-making. His name remained on the company records, but the power he had flaunted for years had evaporated in an instant. The once confident man was now humiliated, his credibility in ruin. I made sure the process was thorough and fair. Employees who had suffered because of Ethan's reckless decisions received restitution. Bonuses that had been withheld were restored, promotions unfairly denied were reconsidered, and those who had endured the stress of his poor leadership were acknowledged. Daniel helped me ensure that every corrective measure was documented, leaving no room for dispute. Seeing employees' relief and gratitude reminded me why patience and strategy mattered more than anger. The satisfaction of righting wrongs quietly, without fanfare, was deeper than any public revenge. Clara's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. She had always subtly undermined me, but now her jealousy and panic were impossible to hide. She sent frantic messages to board members, tried to question my decisions, and even attempted to cast doubt on my motives. But by this point, her efforts were useless. The employees and the board had already seen the truth, and Clara's panic only highlighted her own insecurity. Watching her flail silently while I remained calm gave me a quiet sense of vindication. I spent the next few weeks overseeing the company's operations more closely, making small but meaningful changes to ensure stability and growth. Projects that had been delayed under Ethan's leadership moved forward smoothly. Client relationships improved, and internal morale reached new highs. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced the shift in power and reminded me that justice had been served without drama or spectacle. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled to maintain any influence. Calls went unanswered, former colleagues avoided him, and his reputation in the industry began to crumble. He had underestimated the quiet strength of the person he thought was beneath him, and now the consequences were unavoidable. Every time I heard of another failed deal or misstep on his part, I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the humiliation he had once inflicted on me was finally mirrored in his own life. Through it all, I remained composed. The goal had never been to destroy, but to restore balance and ensure accountability. Watching the company thrive under careful guidance, seeing employees regain trust and confidence, and knowing that those who had doubted me, including Clara, were forced to acknowledge the truth, brought a deep sense of empowerment. For the first time, I felt completely in control, not just of the company, but of the narrative itself. Justice had been served, and the humiliation I endured had been transformed into strength. Ethan's downfall, Clara's panic, and the employees' relief were all pieces of a carefully orchestrated outcome, one that proved patience, intelligence, and quiet strategy could overcome betrayal and arrogance alike. I often think back to that night, the one where Ethan slapped me in front of everyone, and I remember the shock, the sting of humiliation, and the disbelief I felt. At the time, it seemed like my world had been shattered, like everything I had worked for and believed in had been dismissed in a single cruel moment. But now, sitting in my office, watching the company thrive, I see that moment differently. That slap didn't break me. It was the beginning of a journey that taught me patience, resilience, and the quiet power of strategy. Looking back, I realize how much I had underestimated myself in those early days. I let trust blind me, allowed kindness to be mistaken for weakness, and gave Ethan the space to act recklessly. Every insult, every slight, every subtle attempt to undermine me became a lesson. I learned to observe carefully, to plan deliberately, and to act when the timing was undeniable. The humiliation that once burned in my chest has been replaced with a calm certainty, a control I could never have imagined back then. I remember the faces of the people at that party, the awkward glances, the whispers, and the frozen moment when the slap landed. Back then, I wanted to disappear. Now, I see it as the catalyst that propelled me to act decisively, to claim the authority that had always been mine but unacknowledged. I didn't react in anger, and I didn't lash out blindly. Instead, I turned every setback into an opportunity, every insult into fuel, and every moment of doubt into a calculated step toward victory. The moral of my story is simple but powerful. Patience and intelligence can turn even the deepest betrayal into triumph. Arrogance and disrespect are temporary, but self-worth, strategic thinking, and perseverance endure. Ethan's attempts to humiliate me only revealed his own weakness, and by staying calm, observing carefully, and planning deliberately, I was able to turn the situation around completely. I also reflect on the importance of knowing when to act. The timing of my reveal, the careful orchestration of every move, and the quiet authority I established before the confrontation ensured that the outcome was undeniable. The satisfaction I feel now isn't just about seeing Ethan humbled or Clara panicked. It's about knowing that I trusted my own judgment, believed in my abilities, and never allowed someone else's cruelty to dictate my future. Most of all, I understand now that true power is not in public displays or reactive anger. It is in control, foresight, and patience. Humiliation, betrayal, and deceit can leave scars, but they can also become the foundation for growth and victory. The woman who stood in that party that night is still a part of me, but she is no longer the one defined by someone else's actions. I am stronger, wiser, and in control. And in that control, I found freedom, justice, and the kind of empowerment that no slap, no insult, and no arrogance could ever take away. Life after the storm felt different, lighter, and stronger. Collins Tech Solutions was running smoother than ever, and I could finally take a step back and see how far I had come. The company wasn't just a place of business anymore. It was proof that patience, intelligence, and resilience could turn humiliation into power. Employees looked at me with respect, trust, and admiration, and the board treated every suggestion I made with weight. Ethan's arrogance had faded into nothing more than a memory. He was no longer a threat, no longer the figure who had once humiliated me, and his name barely carried the power it once did. I began using my experience to guide others, mentoring young women who dreamed of leadership in male-dominated industries. I shared lessons about patience, strategy, and believing in yourself even when the world seemed to doubt you. I wanted them to understand that power isn't always loud or visible, that the quiet, deliberate steps you take in the shadows can often create the biggest impact. Watching these women grow, take risks, and gain confidence reminded me of my own journey. The nights I planned, the moments I waited, the humiliation that shaped my strength. My personal life also felt lighter. Without Ethan's shadow looming, I could make decisions freely, pursue goals without compromise, and live with a sense of calm authority. The people who had doubted me or tried to undermine me either adjusted to the new reality or faded into the background. Clara's panic and jealousy had cooled into awkward acceptance. She understood, without words, that the balance of power had shifted permanently. The emotional payoff was real. Every project that succeeded, every grateful employee, every client who renewed their trust reinforced the truth that the hard work, patience, and quiet strength had been worth it. Ethan's fading relevance in the company and the industry was the ultimate confirmation that arrogance and cruelty cannot outlast intelligence, strategy, and determination. I often reflect on how one moment of humiliation transformed everything. What once felt like a devastating blow became the spark that set my plans in motion. The lessons I learned, the importance of observation, timing, strategy, and self-respect, now guide me every day. I understand that true empowerment comes not from retaliation or anger, but from preparation, composure, and the ability to turn adversity into opportunity. And in those moments of quiet reflection, I remind myself of the journey, the struggle, and the victory. The woman who was slapped in front of everyone is still part of my story, but she is no longer defined by someone else's actions. I am the author of my life, the leader of my company, and a mentor to those who seek to rise with grace and power. He thought humiliating me would break me. Instead, it made me unstoppable, and now, I own the future he never saw coming. Every step, every lesson, every victory serves as a reminder. No one can diminish your worth unless you allow them to. Empowerment, satisfaction, and triumph are born from patience, strategy, and unwavering belief in yourself. And that is the legacy I carry forward.